All right, we are now recording. Welcome to our Lunch and Learn today, where you will learn all about core and the core from Lori and her team. Looks like Allison is on here. We might be joined by a few other of her team members here in just a minute, but I'm going to turn the floor over. So, Lori, you and your team can have as much time as possible.
Thank you. All right, well, welcome to this Lunch and Learn, specifically about the core curriculum, the newly implemented core curriculum. And as Spencer said, I'm joined today by Allison Kinney Walker. Gina Wagner might join us in a bit. But Allison, as you know, was the main architect of the core curriculum along with a core curriculum committee. And I am currently serving as the chair of the core curriculum. So I am supporting the core faculty and facilitating just the implementation of the courses and just the smooth operation of those courses and that implementation. So I actually have a lot of content prepared with the acknowledgement that I'm not planning to deliver all of it. But there's several different directions we could go. So I wanted to just take 1 minute before I launch into stuff and get a sense of what you are hoping to learn or hoping to hear today. You can just share like one sentence, just so I can shape what direction I take and make sure I cover what you're really hoping to learn. So if you could just unmute yourselves or type it in the chat, that works too. Or maybe you don't care what you learn.
I would love, with all the efforts at the campus, to hear about how that fits with belonging and mindset just a little bit more as you've learned some things.
Okay. All right. So the rest of you are just open to whatever we present, it sounds like. More about 402. Okay. Jillian, if I don't cover that before we run out of time, just ask me.
Oh yeah, I'm just curious more about how that's going. So
yeah. Okay, good. Happy to cover that. I just don't want to forget. Okay, well, let's see, general information to stay informed. Great. So what I thought I would do is give another overview of the core curriculum. It's been a while, I think, since we've really talked about the big picture, just to make sure that everybody is on the same page. And then some of the content that I this wasn't necessarily intentional. It just kind of turned out that this was sort of what was on my mind in terms of what I thought might be helpful. But what I thought I would do is walk through the courses and tell you the major themes, some of the major components, and then why this course is important, and then what I call the developmental arc, how these courses build on each other and how they're related to healthcare education. So that's my plan. Please, at any point, stop and ask questions. It can relate to what I'm talking about, but it doesn't have to. Whatever sort of sparks your thought processes and whatever questions might come to mind. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Let's see here. Sorry, I'm trying to do a couple different things, so I'm going to share. There we go. All right, and I did try this out, so I'm going to assume that it's working.
Yeah, it looks good.
Perfect. Okay. So just going to start at the very beginning. What is it? So the core really is answering the question, what does it mean to form a healthcare professional and an educated citizen at NMC? So we if some of you might remember this, but we interviewed and sent questionnaires really, really early in the development phase to stakeholders, asking what was important for healthcare students to learn, what's important for them to have to take into their profession. So some of the things that came out of that, and some of the things that we also agree that makes a healthcare professional and an educated citizen at NMC are things like critical thinking and reasoning, and I'll talk more about these things in a minute, resilience and self-regulation, professional communication, systems awareness and systems thinking, civic engagement, communication in general. So above I have professional communication, and then communication just across the board, personally as well. And then cultural humility. And again, I'll talk more about some of these in detail. So we have these 5 capacities, and these aren't necessarily all we do in the core. We do a lot of things in the core. But 5 things that, as I was thinking through this, that I wanted to kind of highlight are these 5 capacities that we are building in the core. And so in addition to clinical skills and competencies, and I always say to students and just to general audiences, we know, we're very confident at NMC that students are learning expert clinical skills and competencies. But we learn from all of our stakeholders, including most of you who are in this Lunch and Learn, that professional capacities or foundational capacities are also critical to healthcare formation. You know, the educated citizen really has focused on these foundational capacities for many, many years. So we are hoping, and we have some evidence already, that the core will develop cognitive and professional capacities that programs at NMC can then apply in their discipline-specific context. So we have these 5 capacities of inquiry, resilience, communication, systems awareness, civic engagement, and responsibility. And I just want to say a couple things about these 5 capacities. I think I was in a Core 101 class last fall, and I do a little introduction for the students in terms of just the core curriculum and the core advocacy project. And I think I must have had this word inquiry on a slide. And a student asked, what is inquiry? What does that mean? Like, we know how to ask questions. And so I gave just a brief little synopsis for them of what we mean when we talk about the capacity for inquiry. So I thought I would just share what I share with them. And really, it's the ability of students to evaluate evidence, to recognize biases and assumptions, and to reflect on their thinking. And I remember telling them, you as a healthcare professional, you are going to constantly face uncertain information, conflicting evidence, misinformation, ethical complexity. I mean, so many things in your careers that are really going to demand your intellectual capacity to think critically. And so when we talk about inquiry, that's what we're talking about, the ability to evaluate evidence, to ask important questions, to recognize how our biases and assumptions impact our perspective or our opinions, and then to reflect on our own thinking. So I didn't want to assume that we all understand what that means. I thought, well, if our students ask that question, perhaps it's valid to cover for a lot of people. Resilience, I probably don't have to explain that too much. We know that healthcare professionals face a lot of stress. They have very, very demanding jobs, very demanding days, and need the ability to bounce back from some of that stress, burnout, and those difficult days. If you read my Core Connections email last week. That email was really all about the story of a student who knew how to answer the question in an interview. She was in a clinical interview and she was asked, how do you deal with difficult days? And she knew from Core 101 to how to talk about resilience. And so that's really what we're talking about, is how to help students strengthen their resiliency so they can deal with the stress, the burnout, and just the downright difficult days that healthcare professionals experience. Communication, I think, probably of all the competencies and capacities that we try to teach our students and that we emphasize to our students, I think the one that I hear the most come up across the board is communication. Written communication, verbal communication, nonverbal. It's just something that is absolutely essential and that our students need help with. So communication across the board, written, verbal, nonverbal. Systems awareness, so that students are able to begin to look at social issues and social determinants of health, in addition to what they're learning in their healthcare courses, their professional courses. We're trying to also help them understand that health outcomes, that individual experiences are shaped by larger forces, and to teach students to examine the structures and the forces that impact those health outcomes. And then civic engagement and responsibility. This, in my mind, covers so many things. First of all, our mission statement. The NMC mission statement is about providing opportunities for our students to go out into their communities and make a difference for the well-being of the people who live in those communities. And I'm paraphrasing, but basically we want our students to go make a difference in their communities. We know they'll make a difference every day in the lives of their patients, but we also want them to make a difference in the lives of the greater communities in which they live and work. And then our educated citizen curriculum has touched on civic engagement for as long as it has existed, as well as how to be a change agent. So really, civic engagement and responsibility has been emphasized here for many, many years, and we're trying to carry that out in the core curriculum. Just a little bit about the developmental model, or the core development, how these courses, what their emphasis is and how they scaffold or build on each other. And I'll talk more about these as I go through the courses. But the focus in Core 101 is that individual formation. It's about identity, self-awareness, asking students to really reflect on how they see the world, and then ultimately really to help them see that their perspective is one perspective among many perspectives, and that self-awareness is really essential for having healthy dialogue and making important ethical decisions. And it really is also about cultural humility, knowing that our perspective and our experiences are one of many, 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 many different perspectives. And that's really powerful for students. I sat in on Allison Kinney Walker's Core 201 course a few weeks ago, and I happened to be in a course where they were doing a class dialogue, where they had to talk about kind of a sensitive, charged issue. And the point of the exercise was really to teach them the skills necessary to have those really constructive dialogues, even around sensitive topics. But the point is that toward the end of the conversation, a couple of people in the class spoke up, and both of the people who spoke up were originally from countries other than the US. And they explained how their experiences were very different from the experiences that had been shared in the group by students who were native to the US. And it was an eye-opening experience, I think, for students to understand, to have that moment of, oh, there are people whose experiences are very, very different, and that informs how they look at different things. And so that is what we're hoping that students learn in Core 101 is how to look at themselves, how to understand their own experiences, but then to realize that their experiences are one of many, many experiences. Let's see here. Core 202 is about identity and social context. So students are learning that, yes, this is who I am and this is what my experiences are, but then they shift that in 201 and begin to look at how their identity and the social context is important, that they begin to look at, as I said, those different experiences and different identities that all of us have and how that influences the world. So they begin to look at that, and leadership and bias awareness are large topics in that class. Then they move on to not just analyzing or looking at society and how society operates, but then what systems in 301, what systems influence our society? What are the forces in our society that impact all of us, their patients, and the experiences that their patients have? And then last, we're asking them, once they've looked at all of these things, they've looked at some of the systemic problems that creates inequality, we're asking them then to look at what advocacy is, why it's important, and then to actually implement an advocacy strategy. Now, I know that that was a very cursory overview, but the purpose of showing you this model was just to show you that these courses are intentionally scaffolded to move from individual to society to systems and then to action. Let me just pause for a minute and see if so that was sort of an overview of the developmental model or the developmental arc of the courses. Let me just stop and see if there's any questions or any input from Allison or Dean.
Lori, I'm just curious from your team, what have faculty learned about where students maybe struggle the most? I know we're just implementing 401 this summer, but what's been the discussion about where students tend to really like grapple with on this developmental arc, these new aspects of learning?
Yeah, well, so I am going to touch on some data in a little bit, but in terms of maybe some anecdotal things, I don't know if Allison, if you might want to speak to that a little bit, and maybe I'll stop sharing for just a minute. What kinds of struggles have you noticed, if any? And by the way, for all of you, just so you know, Core 101 was implemented for the first time in the previous fall, just this past fall. And then this spring, students are also in Core 201 and Core 301.
I can't identify a single topic that there's like a general consensus of students struggling with. Obviously, individual students struggle with any one particular one of these, but there's nothing that really rises to the top to say, oh, like this is a common thing. I will say I taught Core 101 in the fall. I'm teaching Core 201 and Core 301 right now. And in 101, there was a sense of, I know this content, but I don't actually implement it in my life. So there's kind of a disconnect between an understanding of the content at an understanding or cognitive level, but it's the application of, okay, I know what resilience means, but how do I demonstrate resilience when I'm going through something really difficult? Or I understand what growth mindset means, but I don't know how to call on that when I'm in a really difficult moment. And so that's, I think, where the continued work is to give students opportunities to practice these skills. And then what we're going to really need help with is as they get into their professional programs and they're in clinical and they're out in the community, like reaching back to that content that now's your time to practice it and utilize it in these situations. And we're not quite there yet. Students, aren't, I have some students that are taking Core 201 while they're also enrolled in Nursing 100, but typically 100 and 200 Core will be done before they go into their professional program courses. But I think that's going to be a really important piece as we continue to roll this out is really working together with those professional programs to help us and help the students reinforce that, because students will say, oh yeah, I get that. That makes sense. But then they have a hard time calling on it when they're in the moment.
Yeah, thank you. I think, I think I mentioned that at the very beginning, and it really is our hope that these professional dispositions or these professional competencies that we're teaching, that really the programs can really run with some of these concepts and really show students how to apply them specifically in their healthcare settings. That is the hope. And I can speak a little bit. I taught a course 290, Core 290 in the fall, and I'm not talking a whole lot about it today just because it's a bridge course for ACE students, because ACE students are, as you know, are in an accelerated nursing track and they cannot take Core 101, 201, or 301. So we built Core 290 to help them prepare to take the entirety of Core 401. And I will tell you just anecdotally, students struggled with a couple of the questions that I heard, why, because we spent really almost the entirety of Core 290 having them research and really become familiar with their social issue. That was sort of the focus of Core 290. They had to choose a social issue and really do some in-depth research on that. And some of it seemed too in-depth. Some students said it was too in-depth. And they wanted to know why we weren't moving more quickly into advocacy, which really the advocacy portion is reserved for Core 401. But I think I tried to really stress to them that before they can make those kinds of systemic changes or any kind of social change, they really have to understand all sides of their social issue. So that was a comment too that I heard. I know students are really eager to make change. I don't think we have to sell them very much on civic engagement and social change. They're eager, but I did have to talk to them a lot about the importance of knowing their social issue inside and out if they're going to really be advocates for change. And that whole, one of the other things I wanted to say to build on what Allison said, she talked about how there seems to be a disconnect between what they know and what they can sort of apply to their own lives. And I think anecdotally, I heard the Core 101 faculty say often last semester that students would say, well, I already know this. They knew it. They knew some of this information in their heads. They've heard it before. They've learned about resilience and they've learned communication and they've learned some of those other core concepts. But what the disconnect was, in agreement with what Allison said, was, yeah, you know it intellectually or you've learned it, but we're trying to do the application piece here. All right. Let me go ahead and move on. If there are if you have questions, just unmute yourself. I can't see the chat, so just unmute yourself. Feel free to ask. I'm not going to go into a lot of detail, but I do want to give you sort of an overview of each course. I gave you sort of the overarching vision for the core, the scaffolding, and I just wanted to give you a little information about what each of those courses entails that meets those objectives that we're working towards. So Core 101, in my mind, and according to our course outcomes are really focused on critical thinking and that habit of inquiry. How can we ask important questions? How can we look at evidence? How can we evaluate evidence in the face of the many claims that we're getting, especially in social media? How do we really ask the important questions, and how do we examine evidence? That's an important piece. The growth mindset and resilience, I think we've talked about that. Values and strengths identification. Again, really the importance of this is a couple things. One, I think it does inform a little bit of their choices in terms of what social issue they're going to study and why that's important to them. But even more than that, as I said earlier, it really is about helping students with their self-awareness, with the idea of the fact that our perspectives are one of many, that our experiences are one of many, our experiences and our perspectives are not universal, and that all of our patients and all of the people that we interact with have those same identities, not same, but they have their own identities, their own experiences. And then last, they do a lot in Core 101 about professional communication. And I will say, professional communication and communication in general is really woven through all 4 of those major core courses. So to those ends, the faculty do a lot with Clifton Strengths, values clarification, mindset and resilience, communication, and then that critical thinking and rhetorical analysis. How do you evaluate evidence? How do you evaluate what an author or a presenter is trying to say? What's their motivation? What's their credibility, etc.? And so while we're talking about Core 101, I'm going to just give you, and Allison, this is where you can pipe in for sure, because Allison was really vital in collecting a lot of data in Core 101. But I'm just going to kind of walk through some of the main things we've learned, and Allison, please feel free to fill in anything that I'm missing. But just to give you kind of a highlight of some of the things that students said when we surveyed them over the course of last fall. They did report growth in their critical thinking, in growth mindset, and in applying communication skills. They also talked about the fact that they thought the workload was manageable. They felt, and this was really, to me personally, was really a highlight. Students did see the relevance of the things that we were teaching, that they found the things that they were learning professionally relevant, that they could see how these professional competencies would translate into their professional lives. And they didn't really see many barriers to their participation or their ability to be involved. They reported strong understanding of critical thinking and reasoning, growth mindset and resilience, inquiry habits, and intellectual humility, that idea that my perspective is not the only perspective. And then again, that application of communication strategies. Areas for refinement. There was some comments that they wanted the class to seem less English-like, that it not be so much of an English class. Increase applied learning. Allison, I can speak to that, but I'll let you, because I think you have some insight into that. Clarification of some of the assignments, and especially with regard to the scaffolding of those assignments, that maybe their skill level, maybe they needed some pre-teaching in terms of skills to adequately complete some of those assignments, and then improve cross-section consistency. So the a phrase that we all probably hear often. Well, Dr. Raspy doesn't do that, or Dr. Kinney Walker does it differently. So just that perception that different teachers are teaching in a different way, which in many ways is true. We all have our own way of presenting information, but the content is consistent and remains so. I don't know, Allison, if you want to say anything. I'm going to get to
Yeah.
some of the changes that we made, but I'll stop there for a minute.
Yeah, I think in terms of some of those areas for refinement, we had 9 sections of Core 101. And so with 3 different instructors teaching. So there's just like that natural, as students talk to each other, like, oh, you only have to do that, or you have to do that. Of course, the course design and the course curriculum is similar, but every instructor has their own way of teaching and has their own course policies. But that definitely did come up in the data a couple times. In terms of the applied learning and the English class perception, what I found, I was fortunate for the most part that I taught sections that were all first-time freshmen, which was unique. But what we found with the transfer student population is that there was a wide range of experience that our transfer students come in with. And so some of it did feel kind of redundant or repetitive from classes that they've taken before. But at the same time, we had other students in that same course who were hearing some of these concepts for the first time, or maybe having to use APA for the very first time, whereas someone else has mastered APA. And so trying to really differentiate our teaching to meet all learners, it was a challenge at times. And I think that's where we got some of the comments on the, we would have comments of saying like, we needed more help with APA. And then we'd have comments of saying there was way too much APA. I think that's just the nature of a first year course that serves every student. They have a variety of experience that they're bringing in. So we've worked on making some of those adjustments already, and we have ideas for how we can do that in the fall as well.
Yeah, thank you. And I'll get to the refinements too in a second. I wanted to address, Dean had brought up a few minutes ago the idea of belonging, and I actually don't have that on here, but that was a goal of the course, which is why some decisions were made when we looked at best practices, especially across first year, core curriculum, and then specifically first year student experiences. A couple of the things that emerged was that in order to increase that belonging and that integration into the college community, that on-ground courses are best. So Core 101 in the fall was completely on-ground, in-person courses. And the other piece of that, oh gosh, I just lost my train of thought. That happens to me a lot. But when I think, Allison, you have some insights too into that whole belonging piece and how that played out. I think you saw some sense of that belonging playing out in your Core 101 courses.
Yeah, I again was fortunate that the 2 sections of Core 101 I taught had a learning community component. That's going to be continuing in the fall with our new launch seminars. But there I have a lot of data from their final reflections that talked about this was the place that Core 101 is where they made their most friends. It's where they created their study groups. It's who they felt most comfortable talking with during class, just because there was a lot of small group time, a lot of time to get to know each other. And I think the learning community added a lot to that, but I think Core 101, just the course itself, allowed for a lot of self-reflection and time to talk with each other about the course content, how they were applying it, and where they're struggling. That was one of the pieces of data that came from my focus group in particular on the learning community, was how much just knowing that other people were going through the same thing, how powerful that was to be able to say, oh, I just failed my exam. Oh, you did too. Okay, I'm not alone in this. And we provided quite a bit of time in Core 101 as we were talking about things like growth mindset and resilience and grit to talk about that the experiences that they were having in their first semester. And that it unfortunately sometimes those challenging experiences can bring us together. So the fact that we had lots of students struggling early on in some of their other courses, that actually helped them come together and form more relationships and more sense of belonging. And that was not a planned piece, or it was not something I was thinking about when we developed Core 101, but it really was an unintended positive outcome of the course.
Yeah, thank you. So as a result of some of the major themes of refinement that students asked or mentioned, one of the things that they said loud and clear was that they wanted to have more opportunity to apply some of the things that they were learning. So the core course itself in the fall was had a lot of we had a lot of speakers come in and talk to them about various things. And I think while that information was really helpful, some of the feedback we got was that less speakers and more time to really apply what the speakers were sharing with us. So that has already happened. We have already increased some of that application time, but also, and I'll talk more about this in a minute, there is the launch initiative that's coming from OSE, the Office of Student Engagement. They are implementing a program called Launch, and they are actually going to be working in the core curriculum with that Launch program to do exactly this, to really give students the opportunity to apply the content that they're learning in Core 101 and really work on those skills. So that is in process. It's already happening, but that will really be ramped up starting in the fall of 26. More assignment scaffolding. So we took some time to really look at, okay, what are some of the skills that students need ahead of time before we give them maybe some big assignments. For instance, they have a pretty big speaking assignment that they do. But we found that they could really use some practice doing some having some smaller opportunities to do some public speaking or some classroom speaking before they get to that larger assignment, that larger speaking project. So a little bit more scaffolding in terms of doing some pre-teaching and some opportunities for students to practice some of the things before they get to any major assignments. Just looked at our rubrics again, making sure that the rubrics were aligned, which really we had already done in preparation for the course, but we just revisited those to make sure that that the core faculty looked at those and made sure that those rubrics were all aligned. And then we meet, the core faculty meets once a week for an hour and a half, and we do a lot of this calibration where we check in with each other. What are you teaching this week? What are the main concepts? What is working? What isn't working? How can we make this better? We were doing that all through the fall semester, but we're continuing to do that. That's just something that is an automatic agenda item, is that we work on that collaboration. And again, as Allison and I said before, not that we are teaching in the exact same way, because we all have different, different ways of teaching, and we use our personalities and our skills to teach in the way that works, that we know works for students. But just to ensure that we're teaching the same content, that students are having very similar experiences. So those are some of the bigger things that we have already implemented and that continue to drive change and refinement in at least Core 101. And I'll say this again at the end, but we also are planning the same types of assessments, data gathering in all the core courses as they are implemented. And this semester, that includes Core 201 and Core 301. Okay, the Core 201 overview. Again, this is the area or the course in which students begin to look outward. Uh, that self-awareness turning to social awareness. And so we do a lot there with leadership styles, identity and bias, microaggressions, social determinants of health, and civic engagement. I talked a little bit about many of these at the very beginning when I was giving you sort of those 5 competencies. And then just some interesting assignments, and we can, maybe at another point in time, maybe another lunch and learn, we can go into some more detail about some of these elements or these activities, because they're really innovative and exciting. At least for us, they are. I think students really so far are enjoying what they have been doing in Core 201. And as I said, I've been in that course, and it was really exciting to see what students are doing and what they're learning. Core 301, this is then, so I talked about the fact that we go from sort of individual work, individual awareness, self-awareness, to looking at society and social awareness. And then we ask students to move to analyzing systems. What are the systems that really impact people in our society? So we look at what are the barriers to diversity, equity, and inclusion? What is intersectionality, and how does that impact a patient in terms of their multiple identities? And how, yeah, what does that intersectionality really mean for individual people and patients? The impact of structural racism in our culture. And then we look at, and this is true in both the Core 301 course and the program courses. So when we put the core together, we looked at the 3rd year of professional courses, program courses, to say, what can we have students do in those program courses that tie in? And so we've asked the programs to really include some work in policy analysis. By this time, students have chosen a social issue to work on for the remainder of their time at NMC. And so we want them to explore what are the policies that impact that social issue? Which ones are helpful and which ones maybe are not? And then what is the historical context for those policies? And then again, systems analysis. What impact do systems have on people? And then what are the systems that impact social determinants of health? So students begin to look at that. And then again, just some of the signature elements, the signature projects that students undergo in 301. And then last 401 is when they go from analyzing systems, analyzing policy, to then making the transition to, now that we have learned all of this about our social issue, about social systems, what can we do about it? What's our responsibility as healthcare professionals? And then how do we actually do it? What are the skills? What are the steps? What do I need to know to really make a difference in this area? And so we teach them about social justice and social change, what that means. I'll get back to professional communication, but civic action, they have to learn what various types of advocacy are, very specifically, what's legislative advocacy, what's media advocacy, what's community-based advocacy. They have to put together an advocacy plan that would best represent their social issue, or would best lend itself to their social issue. And then we're asking them to actually implement a piece of that plan. And as a part of that, they are putting together several different pieces of communication that can be used in any of those areas of advocacy, whether they're meeting with an elected representative, or they're communicating with the media, or they're going into the community for advocacy. So they're doing this advocacy plan, the advocacy implementation, and then the very end, their signature capstone project is to put together an exhibit and a presentation that tracks and presents their growth over the course of their time at NMC in terms of their growth in awareness, in the educated citizen, in being a change agent, and being an advocate that really lives out our mission statement at NMC. So I'm going to stop again and see if there are any comments or questions before I move on. All right.
Lori, I don't know
Yeah.
if you mentioned that Core 101 and Core 201 are on-ground experiences. Core 301 and Core 401 are online experiences.
Mhm.
And so, yeah, just let you know, as you look at those activities and the concept or the themes, just keep in mind that those final two courses students are completing online. And so far, I mean, we're halfway through Core 301 for the first time online, and I'm really pleased with the experience students are having and some of the ways we've been able to engage students even in a asynchronous online course.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, I'm going to actually move to, this is really kind of a recap of some things that I've already talked about. So I think I'm going to, just for the sake of time, I'm going to move to where we are. What's the current status of the core? And just point out what we see some of the strengths are and what some of the next steps are beyond where we are right now. So the strengths, what we've learned from students and just from stakeholders and from our experience in the course so far, is that we really have been extremely intentional about the progression of the courses, about the progression of the themes, the objectives, and it is really scaffolded. Hopefully I've gotten that point across, that it really has been scaffolded to maximize student experience from individual formation, self-awareness, to how all of that builds on each other, from to social awareness, to systems awareness, and then finally to advocacy. And that has all been very intentional. We learned from our data in terms of our, what is the feasibility and the acceptability of Core 101. We learned from the data that there is strong student endorsement. I think I don't have the numbers in front of me, but almost a large percentage of students either agreed or strongly agreed that the course was helpful and should continue to be offered. We are using data. I have folders and folders of the data that the Core 101 faculty have collected just in one semester. So, and we definitely, hopefully I got this point across as well, we have used that data for the decisions that we've made, for the refinements that we've made, and we are committed to continuing to collect that data as all these core courses are rolled out. And then the other thing that I think is really a strength of this core curriculum is that we went out of our way, and I do have to, I know it'll embarrass her, but I do have to give Allison credit for this. We really went out of our way to make the development of the core collaborative, and really bounce it off lots and lots of different people as it was being built and designed. And so I think from that standpoint, it really is institutional. We made that intentional as well. We asked the programs to really build in some of these activities and content and assignments into their own courses, so that students would see the connection between the professional competencies that we're teaching and then the clinical applications. So that's what I mean when I say it's institutional. I really do feel as though we are all a part of making sure students are getting the well-rounded experience of learning professional competencies and then applying them in their specific healthcare professions. As we've said a couple times, we are continuing to roll out these courses, 201 and 301, are currently in this spring. They're being taught for the first time. And Core 401 will be taught for the first time in this upcoming summer. Again, continuing to assess these courses as they roll out. I mentioned the launch initiative, and I don't have a lot of specifics to share about that, except just, as I said, that the Office of Student Engagement is implementing a program called Launch in the fall, in which they will work really, really closely with the Core 101 core faculty and the curriculum to really give students those hands-on experiences to practice what they're learning. And then we are committed to cross-division collaboration as we move forward as well. I have some discussion questions there, but I'm going to open it up again for questions, comments, and I haven't forgotten I need to talk about Core 402 as well. But any questions, comments, hopes?
I wanted to mention something about the scaffolding and then how it's embedded within the institution. So almost every class period, I am saying, hey, remember in Core 101? And it's so easy to refer back to what students learned in Core 101 as I'm teaching Core 201. It's unfortunate because right now I'm teaching Core 301 to students who haven't taken 201, but as I'm teaching both at the same time, I'm like, oh, this is going to be so cool when these 201 students come to 301, how we can build off these conversations. So teaching in all three right now, it's so clear to me how this is working. And so I love that. The other cool thing is I get to go and present to our Nursing 100 students on their community engagement 101 kind of orientation to their community clinicals. And I was talking with Liz. I don't think Liz is on the call, but she teaches in 100 and we co-present the lecture that day. And I thought, oh my gosh, this is so cool. The students are going to be coming straight into Nursing 100, straight out of Core 201. And there is so much really good connection that students are, that we may need to, remind them, because even a few weeks, they sometimes forget, but I think it'll be really easy to make those connections for, in the programs from what they can pull on what they've learned in the core courses. So I'm already seeing so many more applications and connections and reinforcements. Not that we didn't have that in our previous curriculum, but it was not nearly as easy to identify, and it wasn't as intentional at the time. And so I think now it's really easy to do. I'm excited for that.
This is Dean. I'm curious, with so many nursing, I don't know how many we have in HP. I can't see the full list, but what does this really invite us to do as we think about integrated planning, that, because it's so application heavy and it supports what we're doing in professional programs? Like, what's our opportunity as a college for continued collaboration? I'm just curious, for those on the call, what you're thinking about with this presentation.
While you're all thinking about that, I'm going to answer Josh's question. So Core 201, if you remember from the rollout, one of the really key best practices is in Core 201 is interprofessional communication, because that's something we heard loud and clear from our stakeholders and we know is really important in healthcare. And so the goal was to make sure that students do have an opportunity to work with students from different programs. Unfortunately, sometimes the scheduling of that is just not as easy, because like everybody in the whatever needs to take it at this time. And so that they all end up being in that section. And then so right now, I have 14 students. One is non-nursing. Everyone else is nursing. However, we're being creative, because there's a simulation experience in an interprofessional simulation experience as part of Core 201 that requires people from different programs. So programs have identified second year students that are going to come into the class to interact in this simulation. And so there's, and we're hoping that as we have more sections, we only have 2 sections of Core 201 this spring. As we have more sections, then there will be more diversity of programs represented. But that's something that I think we have to continue to be intentional about. And unfortunately, scheduling sometimes limits our abilities. The sections of Core 101, again, we'd love to have those be more diverse. I ended up with first-time freshmen all nursing because the schedules is how that got determined. I don't know if that helps you, Josh, but just wanted to explain
Oh
from my
no, that
experience.
helps. I appreciate. Oh, and I appreciate that. And I know there's so many variables that go into schedule building. I couldn't imagine. I'm not part of any of those processes, but it was just something I was curious about. And it's good that, you know, even if you have, a class that doesn't have a big mix, that you're giving them other experiences, like you mentioned. So that's really good.
Did anybody come up with any thoughts about Dean's question in terms of what are you thinking about how this impacts your work? How it could be strengthened? All right. Well, at any point in time when you have questions or concerns, please reach out. Let us know, Dean, myself, any of the core faculty. By the way, Allison, of course, Gina Wagner and Sarah Rasby and myself are the core full-time faculty. So reach out anytime. 402, sorry, I forgot. I'll answer that in just a second. Spencer put the Dove credits link in the chat. 402, we have a couple minutes and I'll address 402 and then Gina, I'll get to your question as well. 402, I didn't really cover it, but Core 402 is a 1 credit hour course for our final year students. And the purpose of it is really to give students an opportunity to explore some contemporary, professional, really relevant topics that is going to be or could be very impactful to their actual healthcare practice. So students are taking a 1 credit hour, very practical course that is offered by several different members of the community, even some people from the health system. Anybody is really invited to apply to teach that 1 credit hour course. It can be, there's so many different variations of what that could look like. It could actually be a 15-week course, but it also could be a 1 day or a weekend immersion experience. So it has lots of different forms. We are offering it twice in the fall. So we have 2 sections in the fall, this coming fall. And then in the spring of 27, we'll have at least 4 sections that we're prepared for right now. And Dean Monternock he will send out on a regular basis a reminder and an application for any of you. If you have a specialty area that you would like to teach, we really strongly encourage you to apply to do that. Yes, students select their preferred topics, so they will ahead of time get the list of what's being offered in that particular semester, and they can pick what topic is of most interest to them. Gina, just wondering if you have, that's a great question. In the core, do we have students join a professional organization? That's a really great question and a great point, because in Core 401, when they are doing their advocacy work, I do refer them, or planning to, I haven't taught it yet, but there is a part in there where students are asked to look at their healthcare, their professional healthcare organization, and what that organization is doing in terms of advocacy. So that is something I would like to ask you more questions about that in terms of actually having them join, but that is a great question. One more
Jillian,
minute.
yes, Jillian,
Oh, sorry.
students will get to select their topic, but it will probably also be based on their scheduling, the schedule. So, you know, a course, there'll be different course offerings. Some will be online, some will be in person, some will be over the whole semester, some will be a shorter duration. So we hope that they can choose the topic that they're most interested, but it's also going to have to fit into their schedule that semester that they take it. But the seminars were really designed as an opportunity, or 402 is called the seminar, opportunity to give students a little bit more choice. As you all know, in our programs, they're really prescripted. Whereas when I was an undergrad, I could be like, oh, that sounds cool. That sounds cool. And I had a lot of choice in terms of what courses I took. Our students have very limited choice, but we wanted to give them something where they could say, oh yeah, I'm more interested in this type of thing rather than this. And this is the opportunity in the core where they really get to do that. We did include that in core 301 too. You saw a book club, I'm calling it book club, as part of 301, but they get to choose which topic they want to go more in depth with. It's not obviously getting to choose an entire course, but they get to choose a little bit of the content and curriculum that they focus on. And we're trying to embed that where we can, because we know that students buy-in and students' interest is elevated when they get to choose something that aligns with their interests.
Yeah, thanks, Allison. And thanks for all of your great questions. Again, please let us know any ideas you have or how we can be helpful, any information you need. And thanks again for your time. Really appreciate you all being here. Thank you.